This all happened 3 years ago on Christmas Eve. I was spending the evening with my side of the family and my husband at my grandparents' place, which was also my childhood home. I never liked this place. I was only there out of obligation because, let me tell you, these are not good people. All night, they were giving me this same passive-aggressive and slightly unnerving, plasticky behavior. Towards the end of the night, my grandmother wanted us to go upstairs to, quote, see the rooms, which I didn't understand because they haven't changed since I had lived there. People were starting to go home, and my grandmother was still pestering us to go check out the upstairs. Everyone was gone now except for my mother, grandparents, my husband, and I. Everyone was gone now except for my mother, my grandparents, my husband, and I. My grandmother really wanted us to head upstairs. Eventually, I decided to just humor her, so my husband and I went upstairs by ourselves while everyone else stayed down. We were chatting casually as we went from room to room. Nothing much had changed in any of them as far as I could see. But then we got to my grandfather's upstairs office. We were hit by an overwhelming smell of decay. It wasn't like grocery meat, but the very distinct smell of a whole animal or body, meat, innards, bowels. Nothing small, something at least the size of a medium dog, judging from experience via friends into taxidermy. We continued the conversation normally, so as not to make a scene while we carefully looked around. But we didn't find anything. We headed downstairs after our 2-minute tour, keeping casual as though nothing was wrong, still chatting, but I was still intent upon bringing up the smell. We immediately found all three of them, Mom and grandparents, standing very quiet and very still, staring up the staircase at us. I still remember the look in their eyes. It almost looked as though they were trying to read us for something. It looked straight up malicious. I remembered how badly grandmother had wanted us to go upstairs. All three of them went into immediate plastic mode, like nothing happened. We didn't even bother to bring up the smell, we just left. That ended up being the last straw situation that finally drove me to cut off contact with them, and I haven't spoken to them since. In mid-2007, my dad got a job at a construction company. We moved to this small, lame town because of it. We had terrible wireless internet. The router was placed on the rooftop, so each time it rained, you had to go restart it. During one particular rainstorm, me and my sister both went up to fix it. We were trying to reach the router from the attic window when we heard 3 loud thuds from the roof. My sister poked her head out to see what it was, and we both saw this shadowy figure with what looked like wooden legs. We heard the thuds again, this time right next to us. We dropped the router and ran downstairs to Mom, and heard the attic window close behind us. We started to tell her what happened, and when we went up to investigate, all the closet doors were open. She didn't believe us and laughed it off thinking we were stupid kids. When we asked her about the closet doors opening, she just said it was because of the storm and wind pressure building up. A few years go by, and we brought it up again, and finally she admitted that the house was creepy, and she didn't want us to be scared. She said that she heard weird noises coming from the basement all the time. The company that my dad worked for owned the house and rented it out to its employees. So we lived on the ground floor, and there was another family on the first floor. In the basement, there were small rooms for the extra staff, like drivers, cooks, security. One night, around Christmas time, we heard a knock on the main door. My brother and I went outside to look. It was this driver, Steve. He was a pretty no-nonsense guy. He asked us if it was us knocking at his door. We said no, as it was past midnight and we were in our beds, and I told him it must be some other staff member. You could see his face turning some kind of pale, and he told us he heard kids talking too, and told us not to do it again if it really was us. We said no, and that he could ask the other staff members, because they'd definitely notice if we had come downstairs. He told us that he's alone, and everyone else has gone home for Christmas. and then he left, all confused. About an hour later, we heard another knock. We answered, and it was Steve again, almost frantic this time. He asked us if he could stay in our room for the night. My brother and I were strictly told not to interact with the staff, so we said no. Anyway, we went back to bed, and the next morning, we opened the door, and there's Steve sleeping right outside our bedroom door. This guy slept in like negative 10-degree weather and risked losing his job just because he didn't want to sleep in that basement alone. Whatever was down there got him good. When I was around, 12 or so, I walked into the backyard of my mom's house around sunset. She was working near the gate to the side yard, installing some electric fencing to keep our dog in. I was watching her from the edge of the deck, looking down a bit, when I saw an older woman that my mom is friends with, named Eleanor, come up from the side yard. This was strange to me because Eleanor didn't live anywhere near us. She stopped in front of my mom and just stared at her quietly. Her jaw looked kind of slack, which freaked me out a bit. My mom looked up. She seemed to stare through her for a few moments and then mumbled something at her that I couldn't hear. Eleanor didn't respond, just continued to stare for about 10 or 15 seconds. Suddenly, she turned and locked eyes with me. She looked extremely tired, and her eyes were all glossed over. She looked much more drained and colorless than how I remembered, and I had seen this woman many times before. She slowly turned her head back towards my mom, paused, and then walked away. I was really disturbed by this. My mom just finished working and came up to where I was sitting and asked me what I was doing. I asked her why Eleanor, who lives a state over, was suddenly at our house. Who? What? I insisted that Eleanor was just there. I was less than 15 meters away and have good eyesight. She looked confused. Eleanor wasn't here. She doesn't even live near here. I tell her I knew that I was 100% positive it was Eleanor, or that I at least saw someone. She insisted that nobody ever came up to her while she was working. She has no sense of humor for this kind of thing and had never tried to fool me, so this freaked me out. Several years later, I asked her about it. She said she didn't remember it at all, but mentioned that Eleanor did die of a heart attack not too long after the fence was installed. I'm not super religious, but I frequently go to a church youth group as I'm good friends with everyone there. We always used to play games before we started discussions and stuff. I'm not super into games unless it's anything involving hiding. In one of the church's childcare rooms is a smaller room with a two-way mirror. Now, I have no idea why there was a two-way mirror in there, but I thought it was the coolest thing ever to hide in there and watch people try to find me. One day, in October, they announced that they were going to play some hide-and-seek type games in the dark. They turned off all the lights in the church, and it was around 6 or 7, so it was already dark outside. It was pretty much pitch black, unless you were in a room with a window or had your phone out. I thought, alright, mirror time. So, first thing I do, I go to the mirror room and hide in there. This other dude came to hide with me too, but he got too spooked out and left. But I stayed. I watched several people come into the childcare room. I could see them, but they couldn't see me, and they didn't find me. 10 minutes or so passed, and I stopped seeing people. I was dumb and didn't realize that they had probably stopped playing. I waited in the dark for another 5 minutes. Eventually, I figured that I should probably make my way back to the main room, where they do worship and discussion and all that stuff. But as I got up to go, I saw something outside the mirror. It was hard to see. The only light in the room was from a window that let in a little moonlight. I saw what looked like a little girl walking around and picking up toys. I was spooked, but I didn't move. I figured she couldn't see me because of the two-way mirror. I was hoping she would go away. I started praying. I don't even believe in that stuff, but anyway, the little girl turned and looked at me right through the mirror. She had this creepy scowl, and then she just turned and ran out of the room into the hall. I was scared witless, but I got out of the closet and went the same way she did. It was the only way out. I started sprinting towards the main room, hoping not to see any weirdness. I got turned around, though. This place is like a maze even fully lit. It was even harder to get around in the dark. Finally, I saw the door to the main room and could see light coming from under it. I said under my breath, "Thank you, Jesus," as I sprinted towards the door, and I started hearing a crying sound coming from behind me. I didn't look, I just kept running. I got through the door safe and sound. Apparently they had all come back and hadn't noticed that I was gone. I entered the main room through the back while they were singing. No one noticed me get there, except for this one girl, Angelica. She runs the soundboard when the guy who normally does it isn't there. We made eye contact, and she looked as spooked as I was. I figured she could hear the crying coming from outside before I came in. I just shook my head and went to my seat. I learned from her later that she had had a similar experience during one of the games. The worst part about it is, I had hid in that mirror room alone like 12 times before. Never again.